Hey, everybody, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hope you all had a great weekend. Good to have you with us for our show today. It starts what's going to be a busy week for us. A lot of it sort of looking back towards National Signing Day and the elite class that Georgia put together. The nation's number one. We'll do some of that on today's show. We got a special guest with us here today as well, someone who has not been with us in quite some time, but longtime UGA fans going to remember this name. We'll tell you all about that. And I begin the show today in kind of an unusual way, with a big announcement about a big announcement. I'll explain it all coming up as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to start the show today in a slightly different way. Obviously, everything you've come to expect here from DawgNation Daily we'll get to over the course of our time together. Special guests coming up. You'll like that. A lot of information on Georgia's 2018 recruiting class, including a chance to hear from Kirby Smart. You'll enjoy that as well. But the thing right now that I'm probably the most excited about is coming up very soon, we have a gigantic, I mean gigantic, announcement about a huge DawgNation event. Now, the details aren't totally ironed out yet, so I'm not able to make the announcement right now about what it is, but the final I's are going to be dotted, the final T's are going to be crossed here, and coming up on Wednesday morning, 10 a.m., when we do DawgNation Daily Live on Facebook. Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., I'm going to be able to deliver you what I believe is the biggest announcement we've ever made here in the history of DawgNation Daily. And I think that you're going to be really excited about this. For a lot of Georgia fans, this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime type experience. I am so thrilled to be able to do this for you. We're going to do it Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. So if you already watch DawgNation on Facebook, that's a great time for you to just sort of be by your device, phone, computer, whatever it is, because Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., I'm going to make a gigantic DawgNation announcement. Of course, if you listen to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, you'll hear the announcement when you listen to the show at your normal time. Podcast listeners, much the same way. You will get the announcement when you normally listen to the show. But if you want to hear it live, if you want to be, as they say, the first to know, Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., I am really proud to have just a gigantic announcement, one of the most fun statements we've ever been able to make here on DawgNation Daily. A huge, great time coming to all of us here, and I'm going to tell you more about it Wednesday at 10 a.m. So please be with us there for the program there that day, and we'll get ready to celebrate what I think is going to be an awesome upcoming event. More on that in the days ahead, including the day of the big announcement, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Also, as we said later on in the show today, normally it's Chip Towers on a Monday. Chip not with us today, enjoying a little time with his family. We got a special guest, though, for the first time in a long time, one of our great friends, the former Georgia tight end, former NFL great Randy McMichael. He's going to be back on DawgNation Daily. And so that's going to be a really fun conversation with Randy coming up. We'll kind of get more into the story of the Georgia Bulldogs with Randy, who is always an outspoken, very opinionated guy, and no doubt he's got a lot to say about the state of Georgia right now. We'll do that with Randy McMichael a little later on today's program. But, as we kind of look back on the National Signing Day performance for Georgia, number one class in the country for 2018, there is an aspect of the class that I feel like is probably a little bit underrated. And in one respect, it's almost like Kirby Smart may have performed better on National Signing Day than some have given him credit for. And it's almost like the actual story behind what Georgia's doing from a class standpoint may be a little different than some in the media kind of understands. There's almost this approach for Georgia's 2018 signing class that it's this embarrassment of riches. And Georgia outpaced the rest of the country so much that it's almost like, lapping the field, spiking the football, whatever, analogy or metaphor you want to use here in terms of how much Georgia outpaced the rest of the country. The only problem with that comparison, though, is most of the teams that Georgia sort of squashed in recruiting, Georgia actually doesn't get to play. The teams that have a fraction of the 4- and 5-star players that Georgia produced for its 2018 class, Georgia may never see those, likely will never see those. What Georgia's actually doing here is trying to keep pace with a program that, while was inferior to Georgia for the 2018 class, has been the gold standard in terms of talent collection over the course of the last several years. I'm talking about Alabama. And so while Georgia may be miles and miles more talented than most of college football, it is not miles and miles more talented with Alabama. If anything, what Georgia has done here this 2018 class has just sort of brought it even with Alabama from a talent perspective, from a 4- and 5-star ratio, if you look at the full roster, brought things even, made it a fair fight when these two teams meet up again, and we believe they probably will, likely in the SEC championship game here this upcoming December. Georgia's talent haul has only made it more likely that Georgia beats Alabama, not made it in any way a guarantee. A guarantee that Georgia could beat most of the rest of college football? Maybe that's the case, but the measuring stick is going to be Alabama, or if not Alabama, another Southern team like Clemson, or a Big Ten power like Ohio State, and Georgia's signing day #1 overall class by no means guarantees wins against those kinds of teams. It just makes it more likely to occur. Now, the great news here is the guy that probably understands this best of all is probably Georgia coach Kirby Smart, because when he spoke to the media on signing day and when he talked about what he was able to do, he didn't approach those final names that Georgia added as just sort of like extra add-ons, icing on top of the cake, cherry on top of the sundae. No, what he really viewed those guys as needs that had to be filled. These weren't luxury items that you threw in the shopping cart, on your way out the door there. These were, if you listen to Kirby, these were positions that had to be filled for him to apparently feel good about what Georgia accomplished in 2018. If you don't believe me, hear Kirby Smart for yourself right here.
Well, we felt like we needed a receiver, and we were going to go out and say who's the best receiver still available and try to target those guys, and we needed that, only bringing one in, losing 4 next year. So one of the biggest needs we have on our board is for wide receiver after next year. So we're sitting here saying here's 2 coming in, and both those guys will compete and have a chance to come in and play, but we're going to need that moving forward in the 2019 class. So that was big. Obviously the corner position was a position, and DB position was one that we wanted to fill. We felt like we kind of had every box checked. Maybe the safety box was one that was missing, and we were able to fill some of those needs today as well.
So I think that's a really interesting statement from Kirby Smart there. While most of America says, oh my gosh, did you see what Georgia did in December? Is there any talent left for them to get in February? Kirby Smart's approach was, hey, we still need the big wide receiver. That's why Tommy Bush was important. We'll have more on Bush coming up a little later on in the show. We really need the lockdown quarterback. That's why Tyson Campbell is really important there. We really need a safety. And by the way, how nice is it to say, let's take one of the most athletic linebackers in the country like Otis Reese. Let's get ready to make him a safety in the future. That's what Georgia is saying right now. So Kirby Smart's approach to signing day would seem to be a little bit different than some of the media or some of the fans who say, oh, it's nice to add a few more really good names to what was already a great class. Kirby Smart, not greedy, just sort of practical and saying, no, these were needs that had to be filled. We needed these spots, and so we've been working tirelessly, leading up to February signing day to get all that done. Which sort of brings me to the next point that I wanted to make about Kirby Smart here. It is kind of cool to see the way in which Kirby Smart was able to close with this class. One of the things we always preach here on DawgNation Daily is that relationships matter more than anything else, and Jeff Sintel talks about following the visits, and most of the recruiting work gets done with those visits and the relationships that are built up over time. The kind of, assistant coaches like Del McGee and Sam Pittman, James Coley, other terrific UG assistants who sort of develop these sort of long-standing, deep tie relationships. That's ultimately what mostly wins in recruiting. But there is still that final moment, that final point where even with really strong relationships, you got to be able to close the deal. For those of you who are old enough to remember the movie Glengarry Glen Ross about the real estate guys, always be closing, coffees for closers, get them to sign on the line that's dotted. There is a point in which you go from being buddy-buddy, father figure, best friend, to being honest-to-goodness salesman, trying to get that signature on the national letter of intent. And what Kirby Smart shows you once again here with this 2018 class is he's able to kind of play both those roles. He's able to build the long-standing relationship and then provide that proper nudge when it's needed to get the signatures here. He's not taking silver medals. He's going for the gold every single time. Kirby also talked about that on Wednesday, the sleepless nights that sort of lead to the success that Georgia enjoyed here this February. Here's a little more from Kirby.
Have you looked at my face? I have not slept much lately, so it was a sleep deprivation. It was a lot of work. I want to give our staff and the support at this university academically a lot of thanks, because without the support of the people on this campus, this university academically and athletically, none of this would be possible. But our coaching staff did a tremendous job. There was some time yesterday that we might have only signed one guy today, and it all changed throughout the last really 48 hours, but excited about the guys we were able to get.
Kind of an interesting description there from Kirby Smart. Possible drama. We heard about some of that. Jeff Sintel wrote about Tyson Campbell the night before National Signing Day that he hadn't officially made up his mind yet. We'd heard that at one point in time, maybe Quay Walker was more of a Tennessee lean, and Georgia had to make up some ground with Walker and the Vols there late to win that signature. It's kind of a great description of maybe the drama that kind of played out there on a National Signing Day. And what Kirby Smart describes there, both in terms of his own work and the work of his staff, truly is impressive. To me, it is the bedrock on which championship teams are built. How do you do over the course of signing day, both in terms of the 12 months leading up to it, the relationships you build, and those moments there at the end when you're the kind of program that becomes really hard to say no to? Georgia has established itself as a recruiting power. There is no doubt about that. We firmly believe those successes on National Signing Day are going to lead to successes in September, October, and November in games on the field, both in 2018 and for many years to come. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us. Whether you're watching us on video at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page, checking us out on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or in podcast form wherever podcasts are found, iTunes, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad you have found DawgNation Daily today. As we said, it is Randy McMichael, the former Georgia Bulldog tight end, a really great, outspoken guest here on DawgNation Daily. Longtime friend of the program. He's coming up in just a few minutes. I also want to remind you one more time of what I said to start our show today. Wednesday at 10 a.m., a massive, massive announcement. The biggest we've ever made here on DawgNation Daily, I believe. When you hear the announcement, I think you're going to believe it, too. We don't quite have all the I's dotted, T's crossed yet. Some of the details still being cleaned up here over the course of the next 48 hours. But by Wednesday at 10 a.m., we're going to have all the issues ironed out and ready to announce what we think is going to be just one of the biggest moments in DawgNation history. So we'll tell you more about that coming up Wednesday at 10 a.m. right here on DawgNation Daily. We're really excited about that. Later on in today's show, I will take a moment to address sort of the future of the Georgia basketball program, at least my thought about it. And the one big question that I think sort of hangs over the head of all this discussion in terms of where Georgia goes from here, both with its on-court product and kind of everything else running the program, including the future of Mark Fox. I'll do my best to address that here on DawgNation Daily today. Before that, though, I actually want to go back to something we were just talking about a moment ago, because Kirby Smart was talking about some of those National Signing Day needs, some of the needs that the Georgia program has. And one of the things that Kirby brought up there was the big wide receiver. Georgia needed that big, tall wide receiver. That's obviously what Tommy Bush is for Georgia. Big 6'5" guy, a guy that can really run, a representation of an outside the state of Georgia win for Kirby Smart on the recruiting trail here. There's a lot to like about what Georgia did with Tommy Bush, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting was, I'm a big believer that there is at times a wisdom in crowds. When all of you feel the same way about a certain subject, I have a tendency to believe there's some significance behind that. That means something. And, in the 48 hours or so leading up to National Signing Day, it was amazing to me how many of you spoke out in favor of Georgia finding a way to get Tommy Bush. So much so that it really swayed my opinion. When Jeff Sintel was on here a few days ago, the thing that came up with Jeff was he thought my perfect close, speaking about myself, I would have wanted defensive guys. I would have wanted the two linebackers, Reese and Walker. Georgia got them. I would have wanted Tyson Campbell. Georgia obviously got him. Georgia misses on Rick Sandage. That's another defensive guy I would have liked. But really, the three of Walker, Reese, and Campbell, I would have been glad to call it a day if Georgia had gotten those guys. And yet so many of you felt differently. So many of you were like, yeah, but if you can find room for that wide receiver, you got to get him. If you can find room for the big wide receiver, you got to find a way to do that. You got to go out there and get that guy. So much so, as I said, that I started to think, maybe Georgia fans are kind of making a point here. Maybe Georgia fans are kind of, saying something worth, paying attention to here. And, I heard a lot of reaction from y'all when we were doing the Facebook Live broadcast when Tommy Bush announced, and the big smile came over my face. I was surprised that Georgia had room. You all were celebrating that, and you really get the sense that even though Tommy Bush was one of the later additions to this Georgia class, he is an addition that Georgia fans think could have a really bright future here with the Georgia program. It's also worth pointing out that apparently Georgia coach Kirby Smart feels the same way. Here is what Smart on Wednesday said about his big, tall wide receiver, Tommy Bush.
Well, I fell in love with Tommy the first time that I met him and saw him. He was coming through doing a Southeastern tour, and he came with his mother and father. They were very serious about the process. They were very professional. They came, wanted to see different parts of academics. They wanted to look around, walk around campus, and we got to spend a lot of time with him. I knew right away that he was a great kid. Obviously, his stature is a big thing for us. We were able to have success with Javon this year, and you're sitting there going, how do you replace those back shoulder throws? How do you replace those catches? I mean, you got to find somebody, and here's a kid that probably was he didn't get as many throws in high school as you'd like to have, but when he was on the camp circuit and he was on a lot of the workout circuits, he did a tremendous job. You know, he's a 21.4, 21.3, 200-meter guy that I know and have a lot of respect for track speed. And when you have that much size and that much speed, you're a pretty good football player, and he's got great academics too. It comes from a good family.
No doubt Kirby Smart feels that way, and a former Georgia wide receiver, Terrence Edwards, a guest on DawgNation Daily, he agrees with a lot of those sentiments.
6'5" receivers just don't grow on trees, especially a 6'5" receiver that's actually a very, very talented wide receiver. And I watched him just like I watched all the receivers around the country, and he's the guy that filled Javon's shoes. We also have Matt Landers in the fold as well this year that we've heard about and heard people rave about. So you got to have at least one or two of those 6'5" guys that that could win 50-50 balls, and that's what Javon did a lot for us this year. Those 50-50 balls that we needed for him to come down with, he made it play. So you need guys like that on your roster.
You need guys like that on your roster. Georgia's going to have one in Tommy Bush, and the excitement that you hear from the former wide receiver Terrence Edwards, the excitement that you hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart, that's been echoed by the Georgia fans who wanted to try to find some room for that guy, and it's really a testament to Kirby Smart that he was able to do just that. Filling the shoes of Javon Wims, doing some of the things that Wims did for Georgia, that's an exciting potential role for Tommy Bush to fill, and I think Georgia fans are looking very much forward to seeing that in the future. Good to have you this here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you get ready to enjoy former Georgia tight end Randy McMichael right now. And we will get Randy McMichael set up to go here in just a moment. While we're doing that, here on our video audience, our Facebook Live audience, I see a lot of you pointing out our little special guest here today, my co-host, so to speak. I'll tell you more about that coming up on today's show. We'll give you more information about just exactly what that is and kind of exactly what we're doing. We're getting Randy McMichael on the phone right now. While we're doing that, just for our video friends only, I'll take a little time here to take a few comments while we're getting Randy up and running. Easy Brown in the comment section says, don't forget about J.J. Holloman. And I think that's really a good point to bring up. When I think about the receivers I view sort of most likely kind of breakout coming up here in 2018, for me, Holloman is kind of one of those guys. Holloman, who really showed out last year on G-Day, and at times I will certainly acknowledge that G-Day can be a bit of a false positive. You know, that's not necessarily proof of anything. We've seen guys show out on a G-Day before and ultimately not lead to a whole lot there, but I do like potentially what Holloman brings to the table. When I think of a guy sort of filling in, getting some extra catches in 2018, obviously you expect a big haul from Terry Godwin. You expect a big haul from McCole Hardman. You expect a lot of that kind of stuff. But who's some of those extra catches that we could kind of potentially see a little bit more with? I think a guy like J.J. Holloman could be one of those guys that certainly fills that need. I think that's probably a really good point. Joey Hobbs asked, which recruit's going to have the biggest impact this year? You know, that is obviously a question that we're going to spend, a lot of time answering I think, over the next few weeks. And by the way, if you're just joining us, we're getting ready to bring in former Georgia tight end Randy McMichael as a guest here on DawgNation Daily. We'll do that coming up in just a moment. But while we are answering some of your questions, as far as Joey's question about the recruit likely to have the biggest impact, my mind may change on this a lot over the course of the season. But one of the names that sort of jumps to mind for me right away is probably the 5-star offensive lineman from Pace Academy, Jamari Salyer. And the reason why I probably think of him more than anybody else, while it's not obvious what position he would start at along the Georgia offensive line, would he beat out a Kendall Baker at left guard? I think he would have a chance to. Would he get a look, somewhere else? He might do that as well. But the reason why Salyer sort of jumps out top of mind before anybody else is simply because he is the guy that is probably the most ready to play as a college freshman. The offensive line for Georgia is incredibly deep. That's not an easy spot to win a starting job in. And it's kind of funny how we've changed our opinion on that now based on where we were a year ago. Not necessarily an incredibly, easy place to win a job, but nobody, I believe, is sort of physically more ready for college than Jamari Salyer is. Y'all may disagree. You may give me some other names, and I may change my mind based on what you say. But for now, Salyer's probably the name that comes up more than anybody else. Chad Clark asking about the squirrel, and can we get a jersey for him? Yeah, we got a lot of ideas about what we're going to do on that coming up in the days ahead. We'll talk a lot more about that. Dwight Sharp asks, Will the Dogs have 2 1,000-yard backs this year? That's a good question. And the reason why I would say it's a good question, I still expect the Georgia overall rushing productivity to be pretty high. I think that, whatever Georgia did last year in the running game, they may, as a ratio of running plays to pass plays, run a little bit less this upcoming season, but they're still going to have plenty of rushing productivity, I think. My question, though, would be, if we expect DeAndre Swift to get the most carries, and as of right now, that'd be the safest bet, we expect Swift to get the most carries. What about the rest of that group? Is there a clear number 2? Is there a clear number 2 for who would kind of be there? That, I think, is probably still something yet to be determined, kind of how that is going to go. So, in other words, does an Elijah Holyfield get enough carries to be a 1,000-yard back? Does a Zamir White in a partial season get enough carries to be a 1,000-yard back? Same thing for Harrion or maybe James Cook, someone along those lines. Last year it was clear that it was Sony Michel and Nick Chubb sort of ahead of everybody else, and DeAndre Swift was the clear number 3. Is the pecking order going to be quite as easily established next season? It may not be. It may be Swift getting by far the most, and then a collection of about 4 guys who get a similar number of carries. That's going to be one of those, I think, fun things to watch and listen for in terms of how Kirby Smart talks about these backs during the spring. All right, let me give you a quick update on something. We've got a little bit of a technical issue with our phone line here. So here is what we're going to do. We're going to take a lot of your comments, obviously, and in fact, we may be taking more than ever before if this phone line doesn't get squared up easily. I'm going to tell you more about my buddy here on the set. We'll do that coming up in just a moment. But in order to help out our friends with the broadcast, we've got some broadcast issues to take care of. Let me get ready to do this. Let me get ready to do our SEC through. We'll kind of knock that out. I want to talk a little bit about the Georgia basketball situation. We'll also probably go ahead and close the show, I guess. But if you're watching us on video, please don't go anywhere, because when we close the show, we're not ending the show. About once every 3 or 4 months, this just sort of happens, right? I mean, we're doing live video here. We're also, we don't pretend to be, perfect in every way. We're casual. We're loose. So you're actually going to see us record this show out of order just a little bit here. So we're going to knock out our SEC through. We're going to talk a little Georgia basketball. We'll do our Gator Hater countdown. And after that, we will kind of take more of your comments and then see if we're able to bring on Randy McMichael to the program. If Randy's watching right now, Randy, thanks for your patience as we deal with a little bit of a phone issue on our side. So are you up to date on all that? Glad you are. Also, we're glad you're with us today. And don't forget, Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., huge announcement right here to kick things off on DawgNation Daily. I can promise you this. You're not going to want to miss that. It is going to be just a really, really sort of seminal moment in the history of our program and the history of our little website here, DawgNation.com. With that, let's do the SEC through.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, time now for our SEC Through. And, of course, make sure you check us out this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on SEC Country Live. Mike Johnson, my partner there, we talk about all the issues around the SEC, and it's a really fun show to do, especially kind of coming off the heels of National Signing Day as we sort of look at what's next for a lot of these programs. And, well, what's next here would appear to be a transfer market that's going to be very busy. Now, I have made my case before about this, that I am a big believer that the big sort of untapped issue in terms of how you get better is this transfer market. We've seen Georgia be a great example of that. Think about this past year. J.R. Reed, a transfer from Tulsa. Reed has gone on to be one of Georgia's best defensive backs. Better, at least for right now, than a lot of players who are more highly recruited than him for that 2017 class. It shows you the potential value of a transfer, which is to say nothing would happen for Georgia in the ahead of the 2016 season when Maurice Smith transfers from Alabama and essentially became Georgia's defensive MVP. Tyler Catalina was a starter for Georgia. He's in the NFL now. That was also a transfer to the program. Cameron Nizelek, a transfer to the program. Transfers make you better because the guys that come in are experienced college players. That's a great thing to be able to add. Don't know how much room Georgia has for transfers in 2018, but a couple of Georgia's SEC rivals are certainly looking to use the transfer market to their advantage. Let me start here with Auburn, who entertained over the weekend Calvin Anderson. That may not be a name that you know all that much about yet, but it may be an important name during the 2018 season. Anderson is a former offensive lineman at Rice, played for the Owls there, but he is graduate. He is all free and clear to go play somewhere else, and he's shopping around amongst a lot of schools. But apparently, according to Anderson here, and there are a lot of quotes, you can read a lot of this at SECCountry.com and other venues like that, Anderson really enjoyed his time there at Auburn. This was Auburn hosting him very much the same way that a couple weeks ago they would have been hosting an elite 4- or 5-star prospect at that same kind of position. Auburn lost a lot off its offensive line. Herb Hand, the offensive line coach, he's now gone too. Auburn is looking to get better up front, and a guy like Anderson, an experienced college player, gives him a chance to do that. Now, is this a Tyler Catalina situation where he comes in and he plays and starts, but he's not fabulous? That may be the case. Florida kind of also had done something similar to that a couple of years ago when they brought in the transfer from Fordham. Am I making that up? I always get Catalina and the guy that Florida brought in confused. Sometimes the guy that comes in doesn't become a star, but it becomes a solid starter, and that may be what Anderson could be for Auburn. It's not a guarantee that it'll go there, but Auburn certainly did its best to impress with Anderson a little earlier this week or over the weekend. Alabama also looking to be in this transfer market as well. We talked about this on Thursday on SEC Country Live, that Nick Saban was addressing the quarterback situation. Alabama did not sign a quarterback for the class of 2018. I believe that's the only time Alabama has failed to do that with Nick Saban as coach. In fact, you have to go back a couple years before the start of the Saban era to find a time in which Alabama did not sign a quarterback with its recruiting class. And, Saban sort of played a little bit coy about this on signing day. He said they would have liked to have gotten a guy and said they're still hoping to get one. Then he turned and looked at his SID almost as a cue of what can I or can't I talk about, which really sort of led you to believe that they had a quarterback in mind. We find out now who it probably is. Gardner Minshew, I believe his name is. He's a quarterback from East Carolina. Not a household name, not a big star, but with the future of Jalen Hurts very much uncertain. If he feels like he's not going to be the Alabama starter, does he bolt for another campus, another destination? If so, that would leave Alabama incredibly thin as a backup quarterback goes. Gardner Minshew, in terms of a backup quarterback, you could probably do a whole lot worse than that. Plus, with a rising junior like Jalen Hurts, who struggled to throw the football, and a rising sophomore like Tua Tagovailoa that still hasn't played a lot of football, they need to be pushed to practice. Mac Jones, a signee from the 2017 class, is one of those guys that may be able to do that. Also, someone that might be, able to do that. Potentially Hurts and Tua, but you want to have some depth to be able to hold on to all of that. So we'll kind of see how that goes with Alabama there when it comes to that. A couple other stories I want to get to here. Looks like Lane Kiffin took a brief veiled shot at Nick Saban the other night. There was a tweet. I'm trying to remember the context for this. It was about one of the Philadelphia Eagles players talking about being more fun to win one Super Bowl at Philadelphia than winning a whole lot of Super Bowls at a place like New England because it's miserable with Bill Belichick. And Kiffin kind of comes back in and says, yeah, tell me about it. Obviously a reference to being miserable at Alabama. And the one thing you'll say about Lane Kiffin, he is very, very good at cultivating a lot of attention for himself. And this tweet is another example of that. One more quick SEC through story to get to here. Jim McElwain has surfaced here as a potential candidate for what I believe would be the wide receivers coaching job at Michigan. Michigan's obviously gone through a lot of changeover. At one point in time, they thought they had Dan Enos coming in. Enos now not. Enos going to go to Alabama instead. Jim Harbaugh still looking to fill out his staff, and maybe the former Florida head coach, a candidate for that. It is hard to ignore here, though, just how much McElwain has fallen in terms of, Colorado State head coach, star on the rise, goes to Florida, wins the East 2 years in a row. Now, after being fired in season in 2017, McElwain's not a candidate for anyone's head coaching job, only able to get an assistant coaching job potentially at Michigan. It's not a done deal that he'll take the job, but that's the kind of talent pool he seems to be in right now. That's a pretty messy situation for Jim McElwain there. Leads me to believe that whatever claims he made in terms of the death threats that could never be substantiated, it sounds like not only did Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland not believe him on that, it sounds like the rest of college football doesn't believe him either. And right now, McElwain may be a bit of an untouchable type figure. So kind of a weird situation with McElwain. Apparently, at least for the moment, not a candidate for other head coaching jobs, if you believe these coaching rumors, and we'll make that your SEC through. And if you're with us here on DawgNation Daily, one of the things we've had an issue with today is our phone line. If you're hearing the podcast, the radio show, you probably won't notice much difference, but watching on video, we're doing things just a little bit out of order today. Let me check in with our staff here, who's letting us know that we may be able to try to take our guest All right, we'll do that in just a couple minutes. Let me finish up here in about 3 or 4 minutes. We'll get ready to try to bring on Randy McMichael here to the program. And for those of you who are watching on video, we certainly appreciate your patience on that. Before that, though, let's do a little bit of basketball talk here for a moment. Georgia loses again to Auburn, and this time at home in Stegman Coliseum. It was another day on which I think most of the people who were there on the scene, including our own Seth Emerson, would sort of describe the body language of Georgia as not being incredibly strong. Once again, the offensive performance from the team is incredibly disjointed, and right now things just sort of seem to be a bit of a mess. I thought Seth Emerson's piece at DawgNation.com this weekend, if you care anything at all about Georgia basketball, I thought Seth's piece was must-read material for you. I thought he was incredibly fair and how he approaches a subject that has been on a lot of Georgia basketball fans' mind, and that is that right now the leadership of Mark Fox is very much in question. There's just no doubt about that. And I've been slow to say Fox has got to go because the truth is I don't know who Georgia would hire if Fox is not there anymore. I don't know how this would go. I don't know what would happen here. I don't know what the future of the Georgia basketball program would be. But I sort of agree with what Seth kind of insinuated in his piece that if things don't get better over the course of the season, there's going to be a lot of growing pressure to replace Mark Fox at that point in time. And you start to ask, who is the kind of person that might be? Once again, I'm going to tell you I don't know, but here's the one thing that I do believe. I believe that it's the job of Greg McGarity, the job of Georgia Athletics, regardless if it's Mark Fox's coach or somebody else, to create a scenario where people get excited about basketball. Sometimes we wonder what the chicken and egg situation here of. Is it Georgia fans' job to support the program so the athletic administration will get interested, or is it the AD's job to build up the program so the fans get interested? I'm 100% believer in the latter. This is like any other business. You invest capital in the hopes of getting people excited and getting people involved. And Georgia's got to look for a coach. If it does look to replace Mark Fox, it's got to look for a coach who's going to bring some energy and passion back to Georgia basketball. And I say back because, believe it or not, for brief periods from time to time, there has been some passion around this program. Stegman Coliseum has been sold out before, which makes you wonder about a guy like, say, Rick Pitino, who is probably untouchable for the Georgia program, given his issues at Louisville, but it is worth pointing out here that some people have made the case that Pitino ought to get a second chance. As recently as November, you had Dick Vitale in the page of the New York Post. Vitale, the longtime ESPN analyst, he made his case for Pitino getting a second chance. In fact, if you're watching this on a video, we'll show you the quote about what Pitino had to say, that he said he agreed with Gino Auriemma, the UConn women's basketball coach, that he'd hire him in a minute. The guy isn't on probation anywhere he's been. If there was someone looking to make a big hit, I think that he would be a really great hire. I really do. He's made some mistakes, no doubt about it. I've made some mistakes. I'm sure we've all made mistakes. I don't know how hungry he'd be. This is Vitale talking about Rick Pitino. I know he misses this team because he had told me before any of this happened that this could be the best team he's ever had. So that's Dick Vitale arguing for Rick Pitino to get another chance. I don't believe that Georgia would give that second chance to Rick Pitino. That's just not the kind of pathway this school has gone down. But as we get ready to close up the show, the one thing that I will say here, though, is the kind of things that Rick Pitino would be able to do for Georgia basketball are the kinds of things the next coach would need to be able to provide. A big name, some energy, some passion, the kind of name that sort of kicks through doors and creates headlines for the program, that sort of generates its own kind of energy. Let's face it, the team that was in Athens on Saturday, Auburn with Bruce Pearl, that's the kind of thing that Auburn was able to do. Now, I think a lot of Georgia fans say, yeah, but we want to see the Georgia basketball program handled with more integrity than that. And that's all fine and well. Rick Pitino's not your guy then. And Rick Pitino may be so untouchable that he's nobody's guy going forward. But if you want to just hire the next sort of hot name, the big major level assistant coach or the mid-major head coach, then Georgia basketball in terms of a product is going to remain what it has been, one that's easy for a lot of folks to ignore. 257 days for right now. Georgia football plays Florida again. We think the Dogs get the win. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you watching us on video, here's what we're going to do. So we're going to give the phone call a shot here. Get ready to bring on Randy McMichael. If we don't do that, we'll take a lot of your phone calls. Or I should say phone calls. This is not a radio program. We'll take a lot of your comments. All right, so we don't have that ready to go. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get ready to take a bunch of your comments, and we're going to talk about our special guest here today as well. So this is just one of those things that happens from time to time. You have the technical issue. Our phone line is not working. We'll spend the day after the show is over trying to figure out what's going on with that. Obviously, we want to be able to take Jeff Sintel tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. So let me do this. Let me just get ready to take a bunch of comments. I'm going to explain to our radio audience and our podcast audience kind of exactly the issue with the guests. We'll kind of bring them up to speed. We appreciate all of your patience as well. A lot of y'all like the comments anyway. So we'll get ready to do that. And, of course, we're glad to have you this here on DawgNation Daily. All right, so here on DawgNation Daily, from time to time, there are some technical issues that we deal with. Today, an example of that, our phone line's not working. We can't seem to get the guest on the phone. We were scheduled to have former Georgia tight end Randy McMichael here on the show. We'll have him get on the program really soon. But as far as that goes, not going to be available to do that today, and we certainly apologize for that. But it's going to give us a chance to talk to you a little bit more. For those of you that listen to us on the radio or maybe in podcast form, sometimes you wonder how you can get in touch with the show. Probably the best way to do that is just hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I love the interaction that we're able to have right there. But for those of you that watch the show on video, you know you have a direct access to us during the show, and we take a lot of those comments during the show on our Facebook live broadcast. We do it on the DawgNation Facebook page. And today, subbing in for Randy McMichael is going to be a lot of you with our questions and comments. The other thing I will mention is, and if you're listening to the show, you don't see this, of course, but for those of you who are watching the show, you notice we have a very special guest on screen with us. This is my brand new buddy. It is Eddie. Eddie is my blind squirrel. And for those of you who are paying attention to this, Eddie the blind squirrel is here. And Eddie is, he's obviously in honor of what Dan Mullen said the other day about Georgia. That there you go. If you're watching on video, you see a nice little close-up there of Eddie the blind squirrel. Dan Mullen the other day talked about Georgia winning the SEC, saying 1 year doesn't really prove anything, that even a blind squirrel can find a nut. Well, we've obviously been having a lot of fun with that since then, including bringing Eddie onto the show here. Eddie's going to be hanging out with us for the next few days here on DawgNation Daily, sort of as a kind of a co-host for me, kind of a mascot for the show, if you will, just sort of a symbol of, well, what we believe that Georgia's going to be able to do to Dan Mullen here in 2018. A lot of you have already had ideas in the comments section about, hey, can we get the Gator Hater T-shirt for Eddie here? Can we get some paraphernalia for him? We'll do a lot of that here coming up with Eddie here. We're going to have a good time with that here on DawgNation Daily. Nate Thomas also kind of responding here to Eddie the blind squirrel. And by the way, there is a reason why the blind squirrel's name is Eddie. There is a reason for that. And I am very curious to find out who in the comment section can guess why we have Eddie the blind squirrel here. So no telephone guest. That's not working, but we brought up maybe the most special guest of all with Eddie the blind squirrel. So we'll do a lot of that. Miriam Martin Corbin in the comment section says, love Eddie. We needed a T-shirt with Eddie on it. You know what? At a certain point in time, maybe we can do an Eddie the blind squirrel T-shirt. We'll see if we can be able to do that. Nate Thomas says that Eddie should be here until the Florida game is played. Maybe Eddie will become sort of a regular fixture if that's what y'all want to do here. Richard Smith with a comment that I'm not quite sure I can read. Dwight Sharp says, is it me or does Otis Reese have an old school safety feel? Yeah, I mean, there is an aspect of Otis Reese's game, to get it back to football here for a moment. There is an aspect of Otis Reese's game that I think is really exciting to think about at the safety level. If you listen to Friday's show, one of the things that I talked about was that piece from Ian Boyd at SB Nation about the tight end usage, and I thought that was really interesting to kind of think about Georgia's tight end situation, in that sometimes we don't see enough throws to Georgia tight ends. But what Ian Boyd would suggest is just having them on the field is a defensive issue, a nightmare for opposing defenses to deal with because of the way that tight ends can be used, both as potential receiving targets and also blockers for the running game, even for running quarterbacks. And if Justin Fields were to get involved, that tight ends have value even when they're not necessarily catching the ball. The other thing that that Ian Boyd also wrote about was about recruiting defensive players that can stay on the field, that in the modern game, with spread offenses being sort of prolific and everywhere, that, you know, if you've got a bunch of defensive guys that only kind of fit into one box, then you're constantly have to pull those guys on the field and off the field. Well, now, as many of you are aware, a lot of you know a lot more about X's and O's than I probably do. As many of you are aware that the nickel defense has essentially become the base defense in the SEC. In the Big 12, the base defense almost like a dime defense, like 6 defensive backs. But in the SEC, the majority of the time, a team like Georgia is going to have 5 defensive backs on the field. Well, if that 5th defensive back is Otis Reese, at that point in time, the one advantage that opposing offenses should be able to have, which is running the ball against a team with an extra defensive back, all of a sudden that's completely neutralized because the extra defensive back is essentially still a third linebacker. I mean, it can be tough in the SEC to be playing with only 2 linebackers in the field. But with Reese, he really is kind of a combination of both. And I think that he's probably, if you don't mind me being, very, very blunt here, he is probably able to do that in a way that, like, say, Rashad Roundtree was probably not quite able to. Roundtree was also potentially a combination of both safety and linebacker, but not really safety, not really nor really linebacker. Whereas Otis Reese could potentially be both. I mean, Georgia is one of the very few teams in the country that has enough talent to even consider using Otis Reese somewhere else other than linebacker. But that is what Georgia's able to do when it's got a talent like Reese and a talent load the way that Georgia has in its 2018 class and what's already on the roster. You can kind of do a lot of extra things with him. By the way, in our comment section, I said that there's a reason why our blind squirrel here on our set. And for those of you that are listening to us, I apologize that you don't see this. I'll try to put a picture of him in our show page when I put the podcast up at DawgNation.com. So if you listen to us on the radio, if you'll go to DawgNation.com and click inside the DawgNation Daily show page, you can see a picture of Eddie the blind squirrel. I said that there's a reason why the blind squirrel's name is Eddie. And many of you guessed it's because Dan Mullen, the Florida coach, looks just like Cousin Eddie from the Christmas Vacation, the National Lampoon's movie, and that's why our blind squirrel's named Cousin Eddie. Also, a lot of you have asked where we got Eddie the blind squirrel. I wish I had a better story than this. I raided one of my children's rooms. He has a big stuffed animal collection, so I just dug through there. I knew he had a squirrel. I just sort of dug through there and found it. And when I was leaving his room last night after I tucked him in for bed, he said, Daddy, where are you going with my stuffed animal? Because I said, Daddy needs this for work. And he sort of bought that as a line. So that's kind of where we are on that. And that's kind of where Eddie comes from here. So appreciate my 6-year-old son providing our DawgNation Daily Prop here today. And by the way, if you're just joining us, we had a technical issue in terms of our guest. We were supposed to have former Georgia tight end Randy McMichael on the show, who, by the way, was subbing in for our normal money guest, DawgNation's Chip Towers. He'll be back with us next week. So we had issue with the phone. We can't seem to get the phone signal working here today. I saw some of our off-air technical engineers, producers. They were just like pulling out phone line and stuff like that. So apparently this is a total rebuild job, at least based on what I've seen going on the other side of the glass. So, listen, we do this show every day. They can't all be perfect. Every now and then they're going to have a technical issue, and today is one of those. Rich Nixon says, call Jeff up. The problem is not getting anybody on the phone. We've had multiple people we could have gotten on the phone today. The problem is we can't hear them over the air. This is not like just taking a regular phone call. We have to run it through our audio board to record it for our podcast and our radio show. So a little technical issue on that. But thank you all for being the fill-in today in the comment section on this. Jonathan Searcy says, BA, I think that DawgNation has enough funds to buy a stuffed squirrel. I shouldn't have to take that from my son. I think, though, when he sees how the squirrel's been sort of called into active duty here, I think he's going to be happy to know that he contributed to that. I think he'll be proud to know that. My daughter as well, because it's not entirely sure to me who it belongs to. I'm going to give them both credit for that, I guess. Joshua Campbell likes Eddie the Squirrel. Yeah, so this is going to be our way of kind of mocking Dan Mullen. We're going to have a lot of fun with this because obviously Mullen had some fun at Georgia's expense. At the time, we said we were not really mad at him for it, but we're going to have some fun with him back, and that's kind of an example of that as well. Let me get another comment here. Let me scroll down, sorry. Miriam Martin Corbin says, what I love when thinking about this recruiting class added to our current roster is we have exceptional talent at every position. May not have depth we want everywhere, but we have the talent. Yeah, I think that's true. I think for Georgia, there were probably 2 position groups last season that, for me, probably did not rise up to national championship level. I think one of those was the Georgia wide receiving core. I think one of those was probably the Georgia defensive back core. By adding a Tyson Campbell and an Otis Reese, who you're going to count as a defensive back for right now, by adding them into that group and by expecting more from the class of 2017 here and their second season on campus in 2018, including potentially D'Angelo Gibbs, by sort of doing all of that, all of a sudden now, I think that defensive backcourt becomes a little more talent-rich the way that you would expect a national championship contender to be. Georgia's probably going to have to wait another year for that wide receiver core to kind of shape up that way. And, great respect for Kearis Jackson, great respect for Tommy Bush, but that's probably not a national championship level group just yet necessarily. But there is a lot to like with that future there. And I think Miriam's right on that. Zane Gregory Taylor says there's going to be a lot of stuffed squirrels in Jacksonville next year. Yeah, I believe there probably will be. I think that's going to be a pretty good thing, a really fun thing. Maurice Carter says since the interview with Randy McMichael didn't happen, I should just interview Eddie. Yeah, I don't quite know that I could pull off that. I don't know that my ventriloquism skills are probably good enough to do that. I don't quite know about that as of yet, but that's a pretty good idea. Brian Friedman says, we're talking about a stuffed animal instead of basketball. That has to change. So, Brian, as I said during the regular broadcast, and for those of you who are listening to the radio show, you'll hear this coming up in just a minute. The challenge for Georgia basketball moving forward here is, whether it's Mark Fox's coach, whether it's somebody else, is to generate the kind of thing that makes people want to talk about it. Because ultimately, it is my job to satisfy the people who watch and listen to the show. It's not my job to evangelize for the Georgia basketball program. And I hate to be so blunt about it, but that's just a fact. It's the Georgia basketball job, or maybe more important, the Georgia athletic department's job to create a product that's sort of relevant to DawgNation daily listeners and viewers as a pretty good sort of test case for Georgia fans at large overall. And that means that if you are looking to move on from Mark Fox in the season, the next coach that you bring in has got to generate excitement and enthusiasm. I don't know who that is as of right now. Obviously, the list will start being compiled over and over, and we'll start adding some names to that list. But, take Florida, for instance, who a couple years ago brought in a guy like Mike White, who I think is a really good coach. He plays a better offensive style than Georgia plays. Florida's having more success than Georgia. Mike White's a good hire. But if Mike White is the Georgia coach, there is no buzz, no energy, no passion for Georgia basketball whatsoever. You haven't convinced anyone currently ignoring Georgia basketball to change their mind on that subject. I believe that to be true. And I know that is maddening for a lot of you that care about the product. You care about Georgia basketball. But for a whole other segment of our audience, it's just as maddening that we devote any time to it whatsoever. And so if you want to talk about what needs to change is a product that's easy to ignore. Georgia basketball needs to become the kind of product that's no longer easy to ignore. And yes, you don't have to go down the excitement road. You can be Tony Bennett at Virginia, and you can sort of just bludgeon people to death in a rock fight, 43-42, on your way to a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. You can do that. That's a risky proposition, because what if you stop somewhere short of that? What if you're, much like Mark Fox has been, winning 20 games consistently, sort of missing out on that tournament success, and not really giving people what I think is, kind of an entertaining style of play? That becomes a pretty tough choice to make there. I think the safest bet for Georgia would either be able to find a personality, like what Avery Johnson's been for Alabama, find, a coach who's got maybe a little bit of a reason why other schools aren't hiring him, but he's good enough to win, like what Bruce Pearl has been for Auburn, and find a way to build Georgia basketball that way. Now, a lot of you that care about the subject are going to want to weigh in on this, and I'm very curious to hear about what you do say. But for me, that's the recipe. You've got to make Georgia basketball more entertaining. You got to make Georgia basketball a little more difficult to ignore. And then if the wins come after that, then that's great. But there are some issues that plague Georgia basketball, I believe, that wins alone are not going to cure. All right, let me get a few more comments here. Jacob Lee Mahaffey says, does Tyson Campbell start as a freshman? I think he's going to have a really good chance to. And I think, and we talked to, we're actually going to do something on DawgNation Daily about this later on, probably this week. But I think there's a lot of evidence that indicates that cornerback may be sneakily one of the toughest positions to start as a freshman. We think a lot of times about quarterback being that spot, but how many quarterbacks in the SEC as freshmen over the last couple of years have we seen play pretty well? Even if you want to go back to 2015, Drew Lock played at Missouri as a freshman, and he played pretty well. I don't know that quarterback, because of the way that 7-on-7 goes now and the way that the high school game is just a lot more, kind complicated than it used to be. I think that quarterback's probably a little easier to play as a freshman than it once was. We think about the offensive and defensive lines. Certainly defensive line may be that way, but we've seen Georgia, Alabama, Florida, 3 pretty power programs, all have pretty good success with freshman offensive linemen over the last couple of years. That's becoming the kind of place that you can play as a freshman. I think one of the spots, though, that's going to always be an area in which experience kind of matters is at cornerback. In a perfect world, you just have experienced cornerbacks. But in an imperfect world, you play the most talented players that you have. And that's what I believe that Georgia's facing in 2018. A situation in which there are people on the roster just less talented than Tyson Campbell. He may not have the experience, but he's got the ability. And I think he's going to have every chance to earn a starting job here in 2018 for the Georgia Bulldogs. And we're looking forward to covering that here on DawgNation Daily. For those of you listening on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, thanks so much for being with us in podcast form as well. We appreciate that as well. Sorry about the technical difficulties with our interview. We'll have that fixed by tomorrow. And, of course, we got plenty more DawgNation Daily rolling on right after this. Now, we're done with that. And on video, we appreciate your patience once again. Let me just do a few more comments, and we'll get ready to get out of here for our video-only crowd. This is essentially what we do at the end of every show, but a little out of order today, so we'll kind of get ready to knock those out here on the program. Philip Jordan Wells says, Coach Carter for Georgia basketball. You're going to have to give me a little bit more detail on who that is, I'm afraid. Here's the other thing, and I'm just being completely honest. There were a few years ago when I followed college basketball very, very closely. I don't follow the sport as closely as I used to anymore. I think that when you get older, you get a little bit busier. You don't have as much time to devote to every single sport anymore. I don't know that I've got a real long list of guys that I want to see Georgia hire. I've mentioned one name on today's show, and that's probably going to get a lot of negative feedback. But in terms of kind of creating a credible list of interesting names, and I do think they need to be interesting names, just hiring a good X's and O's coach is not going to be enough here. I think that's a tough thing to figure out. Oh, Philip Jordan Wells says Coach Carter is Rhea Perlman from the Sunset Park. Okay, from the movie. That's pretty funny. Wayne Folan. Y'all look at Wayne Folan's comment. This is a perfect example of what Georgia basketball deals with. Wayne's as big a UGA football fan as you're ever going to come across, but his comment says basketball, ZZZZZ, obviously reference to snoring. You can't fault people for liking what they like, and you can't fault people for disliking what they choose not to care about. And you got a lot of Georgia football fans have decided they don't care anything about Georgia basketball. Now, what I'd be interested to find out from guys like Wayne is, do you watch any basketball whatsoever? You watch any NBA? You watch the NCAA tournament? Are you watching other basketball besides UGA basketball, or do you just not care about the dogs and the hardwood? I think that's a question worth asking. I like what Carlos Folsom says here. Here's a potential look at Georgia secondary. DeAndre Baker at cornerback, Mark Webb at cornerback, and I certainly believe that Webb's going to have a chance to be a star there. Tyson Campbell potentially getting involved as a nickel. Reese or Gibbs as the star, and that's kind of what the nickel would be. Also Reed at strong safety, LeCount at free safety. That's a pretty interesting combination right there, a really interesting combination. Troy Sadowski, by the way, one of my favorite Georgia tight ends from the 80s. Good to have Mr. Sadowski checking on the program. Says Tyson Campbell is good enough to start as a freshman. I would agree with that. I think that's a really interesting thing to watch out for. As I said, love having Troy Sadowski here on the program. Nate Thomas on the Georgia basketball talent says, yeah, there are plenty of good Georgia basketball talent in the state. The problem is getting that talent. Georgia, I'm assuming by choice, has decided over the years to not be much of a player in sort of the AAU circuit, and I am in over my skis in trying to talk about basketball recruiting. I just am. I don't know the story there. I don't know how it works. I remember Georgia, I thought, had a really good chance at Tony Parker a couple of years ago, the really good big man from Miller Grove. I saw him play in high school a couple times. I remember Georgia being in the mix for that, and then it didn't happen. And what I think some of you have described as one of the longest commitment ceremonies of all time, made the Isaiah Wilson ceremony last year look short. But I don't know why Georgia's not really in the mix for these kind of guys. With Jonas Hayes, that seems to be changing some. I don't know. Nate Thomas and Laura Woodard talking about Mark Webb as a defensive back. I think that's a really interesting thing. A really interesting thing to think about his future there. Chad Clark says, don't like to be kept in suspense. Give us a hint about Wednesday's announcement. Here's the thing, Chad. I am not purposely trying to keep you in suspense. There are a couple issues, and it's all going to make sense on Wednesday when I make the announcement. It's not all completely lined up. It's not all completely ironed out. There are a couple tiny issues that we're still trying to square away. So this is not one of those things of, I know something you don't know, and I'm not going to tell you for 2 days. It's not one of those deals. I physically cannot tell you everything that you need to know right now. But Wednesday at 10 a.m., I'll know everything I need to know. All I wanted to do is just sort of, for the people who are curious, I wanted you to be aware that something was going to happen. So if you were on the fence about watching the show, Wednesday's not a day to miss. So that's my issue with that day. It's not in any way to kind of hold something over your head or prolong some sort of suspense. I'm not trying to do that. I cannot tell you now, but by Wednesday at 10 a.m., I will be able to tell you, and I think you're going to be glad you waited. Laura Woodard brings up Ron Hunter, the Georgia State coach. That's kind of an interesting name, actually. He's still doing a pretty good job there now. It's one thing to go to the NCAA tournament when your son's on your team and he's a first-round draft pick of the Boston Celtics. Doing that in the Sun Belt's not the most difficult thing in the world to do, but they're actually still playing pretty well now. Okay, so here's Wayne Folan, a guy who said basketball was Z's for him. He says he watches no NBA, very little NCAA basketball. So there you go. That's a part of the million strong or thereabouts who would consider themselves rabid Georgia football fans, and Wayne is a significant portion of that in that he watches no basketball at all. So, that's a tough selling job for Georgia basketball to say, hey, big-time football fans, we're going to create a product that you are going to care about, even though up until now you've never cared about basketball before at all. That's tough. That's tough. Eric Delgado says, what about the UGA Ice Dogs? I have I've never seen a Georgia hockey game, although it's a club team, right? I have not seen that, but I take that back. I have seen a Georgia hockey game years ago, and by the way, we're getting ready to get out of here. Years ago, back when the Thrashers were still in existence, one night after a Thrashers game, it was a Georgia versus Georgia Tech hockey game, and I got to tell you something. It was really fun. Really fun. Now, in this particular year, the Ice Dogs were not very good. Tech was beating them. Let me tell you something. The rivalry between the two fan bases, and there were fans of both schools there on the rink there that night. It's a pretty intense rivalry. The Tech band was there, which I thought was kind of strange. Every time Tech would score, the band played the fight song. This was a bizarre night. But you know what? Not too bad. I got to tell you, it's actually pretty entertaining. All right, let me find a couple more. Ro Hawkins says, I like the Lady Dogs better. Yeah, Lady Dogs did not win on Sunday at Tennessee, but they've had a great season. Great season. Joni Taylor's doing a good job with that team. Trey Duke says, in terms of our viewers and listeners who dislike basketball the most, I believe that Trey Duke's at the top of that list. Andy Sloan says Tony Parker was a point guard at Berkmar, ended up at Georgia Tech. That was Tony Akins, I think. Tony Parker is a point guard for the Spurs, but the other Tony Parker was a big man at Miller Grove who ended up at UCLA. I don't know what kind of career he had once he got there, but he ended up at UCLA. That's right. His name was Tony Parker, the same as the Spur, right? Santiago Diarn says, can we get Kirby Smart on the show? That'd be a fun thing to do. Maybe sometime we will. All right, we got to get ready to go for right now. Thank you all for watching the show today. Really appreciate that. Eddie, thanks you as well. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Hopefully the phone line will be fixed. Y'all are great to be patient with us during all that kind of stuff. So we'll get all that cleaned up, and we'll be back rolling again tomorrow. Thanks for your time, and y'all have a good day. By the way, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on SEC Country Live today on the SEC Country Facebook page as well. We'll look forward to seeing you then. See y'all.